everybody, I'm Jenny Smith, and if you are struggling to figure out how to manage cell phones in your classroom, I've got great news for you. There is actual scientific research describing what teachers and students rank as the most effective methods to discourage improper or unwanted cell phone use in the classroom. You are going to be surprised with what the research shows. It's very likely that the method you are using most frequently in your classroom is the least effective one. What you're about to hear is research-backed information and ideas that you can use in your classroom tomorrow to help stop or prevent unwanted cell phone use. Now, I'm only going to discuss classroom management methods that have been researched during this video. If you want even more practical tips on how to stop or prevent unwanted cell phone use, check out my other videos on classroom setup and the teacher's guide to managing unwanted cell phone use. So I've split the research into two categories, reactive and preventative methods. Reactive methods mean that you're reacting to something that occurred in the classroom. Preventative, of course, means you're taking action to prevent or deter misuse. So let's take a look at the research. Reactive methods rated by students from least to most effective are a glare from the instructor, verbal reprimand, cell phone removal, grade reduction, or removal of the student from class. The interventions most frequently used by instructors that are instructor reported include verbal warning, embarrassment or shaming, removal from class, that's removing the student from class, grade reduction, or phone confiscation. Students in this study think that personal or public reprimand is generally more effective than simply directing eye contact or glaring at a student who's misusing a cell phone. But of the students who were reprimanded for cell phone use in the classroom, only 40% reported that the reprimand prevented them from using cell phones in the same class, and just 11% said it would prevent them from using their phones in other classes. Instructors, however, used verbal reprimand most frequently during class. So what are the implications here? Of those who already misuse a cell phone, only 40% of those students say that being verbally reprimanded will prevent them from misusing during the same class. Students who are already inclined to misuse cell phones are going to misuse them despite being corrected, or I should say, they're very likely to misuse them despite being corrected. Now, I'm not saying you shouldn't use verbal reprimand during class. A 40% success rate is still a lot higher than zero, and students who hear others getting reprimanded are more likely to follow the rules after the reprimand as well. But it's important to have realistic expectations for the effectiveness of verbal reprimand. But hold up, Jenny. There's two ways to correct a student, in person and privately, or publicly or privately. So is it better to reprimand a student publicly or privately? The research says it's about sixes. In this study, students just don't report any difference between public or private verbal reprimand as far as effectiveness goes. Instructors said they lowered grades or removed students from the classroom least frequently of all interventions. However, this was rated most effective by students. Now, what does this mean for the gospel classroom? It's difficult to implement grade lowering in seminary and impossible in Sunday school or young women. Removal from the classroom can happen in your gospel classroom. But I will caution you that this intervention is very punitive and will damage your rapport with students unless you've established this as the consequence of misuse, either in discussion with your class or by notifying students ahead of time. Think hard before you remove a student from class for misusing a cell phone. It's pretty rare that a cell phone infraction will call for this type of intervention. I've done some preliminary research on what reactive methods LDS seminary teachers are using in their classrooms. The most frequent intervention is no intervention. Interesting, isn't it? 26% of teachers report that they most frequently ignore unwanted cell phone use. The next most common reactive intervention is verbal correction or coaching, followed by restating the policy. So to sum up, the most effective reactive interventions for the gospel teacher are removing the student from class, removing the cell phone from the student, or a verbal reprimand or warning. Now let's talk about preventative methods. These are methods that you're taking ahead of time to try to prevent misuse. Now, research shows that at universities, or at the universities in this study, the most common method of preventing misuse is to state a policy on a course syllabus. But students say this is the absolute least effective method of stopping unwanted cell phone use. You may already have a policy you established for your classroom and that you sent out by email or that you handed out. That alone isn't going to be especially persuasive for students. Remember, though, that cell phone policies determined by instructors ahead of time and discussed in class, allowing for student input, were preferred by both students and instructors. So you really can make a policy work, you just need to do it right, by allowing some student input on either the policy itself, the consequences for violations, and hopefully the rewards for desired behaviors. Now, the following research is very important for seminary teachers. Research found that classes with fewer than 20 individuals helped students engage better with the instructor and material, which, in turn, lessened the likelihood of being distracted by cell phones. So take this information to your S&I rep, your stake leaders, or your Sunday school president and lobby for smaller classes. I mean, it makes sense, right? Research shows that smaller class sizes, now in this case we're talking about smaller than 20, lead students to become more engaged and increase a sense of belonging. And when that happens, students are naturally less tempted to use cell phones in class. Because small classes increase student visibility, students seem to be less inclined to risk being caught and reprimanded for cell phone use. Here's more information that's important. Instructors who lectured less and included more activities and discussion also helped students be less likely to be distracted by cell phones. Now, this ought not to surprise you. Active learning, or less lecture, means that students have less opportunity to misuse cell phones because they're using their hands and minds for class-related purposes. If you are having a real problem with cell phones, evaluate your lessons and look for ways to include more learning activities. My next video, with the Teacher's Guide to Managing Unwanted Cell Phone Use, has lots of ways that you can include more active learning in your classroom. Now, here is some very surprising news. Researchers actually found that students were less likely to check cell phones during videos and video clips. Now, this may seem counterintuitive, but the research showed that students are somewhat, not hugely, but somewhat, less likely to misuse cell phones during videos. This is fantastic news for the gospel teacher, better even than it is for a secular teacher, because the church provides tons and tons of video clips on virtually every topic you'd want to cover in the classroom. So use them. Now, what are seminary teachers doing in their classes to prevent unwanted cell phone use? According to my preliminary reports, the most common preventative intervention by seminary teachers is to add more active learning into the classroom. 20.5% say they're doing this. Fantastic! The next most common preventative intervention by seminary teachers is to circulate or walk around the classroom. 9.6% report that this is how they manage cell phones most frequently, followed by incorporating phones into teaching, posting signs with rules, and classroom setup. My research shows, however, that teachers are most often reacting to cell phone use, or not reacting, as fully a quarter say they just ignore unwanted use, instead of working to prevent it before it occurs. If you find yourself reacting to instead of actively preventing cell phone use, check out my other videos, especially the one on classroom setup, to find out how you can deter unwanted cell phone use before it occurs. Here's one more chart from the study that I think you'll be interested in. It shows a list of items that are factors contributing to in-class cell phone use. You'll notice that the most important factor for preventing it is having a small class. The next being holding group discussions or group activities. You'll find that students are more likely to use cell phones at the start of class and much more likely to misuse cell phones towards the end of class or in a large class. So in summary, the most effective reactive interventions are removing the student from a class, removing the cell phone from the student, and verbal reprimand or warning, with verbal reprimand being the least effective, but still 40% effective in stopping students who are already misusing cell phones. The most effective preventative interventions are having a class size smaller than 20, having more group discussion, having more group activities, and showing videos. So there is some surprising information here, am I right? And it's all good news. This is research-backed information and ideas that you can use in your classroom tomorrow to help prevent or stop unwanted cell phone use. Now, in this short lesson, I've only talked about cell phone management methods that have been researched. I've got lots more suggestions on how to handle cell phones in the classroom that have been reported by other teachers to be effective, but they haven't been formally researched. Check out my videos on classroom setup and the Teacher's Guide to Management for lots more ideas.